This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Deadly suicide attack kills 4 in the Somali capital. Africa's low numbers of those fully vaccinated against COVID-19 highlighted at World Economic Forum session. And we tell you why Kenya's capital city runs a high risk of facing environmental and food supply challenges. Hello and welcome to Africa Live only on CGTN. I'm Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Hannah joins me now with your business headlines.
Thanks for that, Mahia. Well, here's what's coming up in Africa Live Business. South Africa's mining output beats market forecasts after 5.2% growth in November. And Egypt forecasts Suez Canal revenues will rise to $7 billion by the end of 2022. Those stories and more coming up in Africa Live Business, but for now, the hour's headlines with Mahia.
Hannah, thank you. We begin with tragic news coming out of Somalia. 4 people are feared to have been killed and at least 10 others injured after a suicide bomber blew himself up at a restaurant in Mogadishu. We will, of course, keep an eye on that unfolding story. Meanwhile, the spokesman of the Somali government, Mohamed Ibrahim Mwalimu, who was wounded in an Al-Shabaab suicide attack on Sunday, has been airlifted to Turkey for further medical attention. Here now is Mohamed Kahir with more details from Mogadishu.
The spokesman of Somali government, Mohamed Ibrahim Mwalimu, who was wounded in a terror attack on Sunday, has been airlifted to Turkey for more treatment. Government officials said Mwalimu's injuries are not life-threatening as reported by some media, but need special care.
We want to appreciate the Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble for his role in directing relevant agencies in providing urgent medical help for the spokesman, Mohamed Ibrahim Mwalimu, following the attack.
Somali Prime Minister visited the injured spokesman in hospital on Sunday following the attack. Mohamed Ibrahim Mwalimu will join the director of the national television, who was wounded in a similar attack on November, in which the director of the radio, Abdulaziz Gulaid, lost his life. The militant group Al-Shabaab claimed the responsibility for both suicide attacks that targeted the veteran journalists. The group, which threatened to disrupt the ongoing polls in the country, has increased its hit-and-run attacks. The security agencies have been directed to keep the country safe, while the citizens have been urged to be extra vigilant during this transitional period. Mohamed Kahir, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
To Sudan now, where the chairman of Sudan's Transitional Sovereign Council, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, has ordered the establishment of a committee to probe Monday's clashes between street protesters and security forces, which resulted in the deaths of 7 protesters. Protests against military rule have been ongoing in parts of the country. Wilkista Nyabwa has more details.
Thousands of protesters once again tried to reach the presidential palace in the capital, Khartoum. But security officers reportedly tried to clear the demonstrators from the scene by dispersing them with tear gas and live bullets. This led to some deaths, while many demonstrators were seriously injured. Reports indicate that the death toll from the continuing protests now stands at around 67. Protesters have, however, vowed to remain in the streets until their demands are heard by the military.
We are now out and we will not leave the streets until our demands are clear.
The recent demonstrations come after the Forces of Freedom and Change eased its tough stance against holding any dialogue with the military leaders. It has instead approved an initiative by the head of the UN Special Mission in Khartoum, Volker Perez, to hold talks to end the standoff. Perez has organized several meetings with the forces as part of efforts to make the Sudanese dialogue initiative successful.
The forces of freedom and change made it clear that for the initiative to succeed, it must clearly address the demands of the protesters, which are represented in the civil state, the return of the military to the barracks, and the disassociation of the military institution from the political life in Sudan.
Meanwhile, the head of the Sovereignty Council, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, is wishing those injured during the protest a speedy recovery. Burhan has also commended the police for maintaining security in the country and is urging the Sudanese people to obey the country's laws. Wilkesanyabwa, CGTN.
Now, it's been a week since ECOWAS imposed extensive economic sanctions on Mali. The landlocked country relies on its neighbors for international trade. CGTN's Asta Tal takes a look at how Malians are coping with the embargo.
Previous ECOWAS sanctions had targeted members of the ruling junta and their families. But the sanctions imposed on the 9th of January threatened to directly impact the country's economy. The restrictions have also affected travel, with ECOWAS member countries except Guinea closing their borders with Mali.
Mali is under embargo, and that's not good for us. We have a huge problem getting people into the sub-region. The Ivorians, Senegalese, and several other nationals from the sub-region were stuck here. They can't go home because the borders are closed. You see, the ECOWAS sanctions have not only a negative impact on the Malian people, but also on the populations of the sub-region.
ECOWAS sanctions, however, do not target critical consumer goods. These include fuel, medicine, food, and supplies for COVID-19 response. It, however, effectively freezes Mali's assets in commercial banks.
ECOWAS could have simply frozen the assets of the members of the National Transitional Council, but extending sanctions to the state of Mali means the ECOWAS wants to prevent the payment of Malian civil servants. When we prevent the payment of civil servants, it is as if it is the people as a whole that we have decided to sanction. Yet ECOWAS says the sanctions are not meant to hit the people of Mali, but rather its authorities. Freezing Mali's assets also means punishing private companies because the banks will not be able to meet the needs of these companies.
The regional body has defended the sanctions, deeming them necessary after Mali's military junta failed to meet the February deadline to hold elections. The military junta instead announced a 5-year extension. In addition to the ECOWAS embargo, the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, says the body will fall in line with the regional body's sanctions on Mali. Asta Tal, CGTN.
Meanwhile, Mali's threat to airlines to confirm their service with the country's National Civil Aviation Agency or lose their time slots appears not to be causing serious concern among member countries of ECOWAS. Earlier, we caught up with Nabil Ahmed Rufai to get more insights into this and what could happen next after the imposition of tough sanctions against Mali.
It really does not appear that the ECOWAS member countries are concerned about this pushback by the Malian Authority. And of course, as you rightly said, the deadline is today, and there's no word from these member countries as to whether they would want something to be done about it. Because, you know, when ECOWAS took the decision to shut its land and air borders to Mali, it actually said it was going to stick to that sanction until some amicable resolution between ECOWAS and Mali is arrived at with regard to the timeline to hold elections to take the country back to a civilian government. Well, for now, it's quite difficult to say what next the ECOWAS regional bloc would take. I don't know if they actually foresaw this pushback by the Malian Authority, because these sanctions that were imposed are quite tougher than the earlier one that were imposed after the coup by the military junta. So this perhaps would take the ECOWAS authorities, ECOWAS leaders aback because they would least expect such a pushback from the transitional authority. But then it remains to be seen what further actions they would really take now that things are going in this direction. And one can say that these sanctions that have been imposed on Mali, both economic and shutting their land and air borders to the country and also freezing their financial assets are quite harsh. And we are not able to even tell what further sanctions will be imposed on Mali now that the transitional authorities have taken this route to really, protest these sanctions by the ECOWAS leaders. So it's really a tough one to state exactly what the next line of action of ECOWAS would be now that things are taking this direction.
Well, let's now revisit our top story from Somalia, where 4 people are feared to have been killed and at least 10 others injured after a suicide bomber blew himself up at a restaurant in Mogadishu. Well, let's get further details on that story. For the latest, we're now joined live from the Somali capital by our correspondent, Mohamed Kahir. Mohamed, it's yet another attack in the Somali capital this week. What more details can you share with us?
Well, yes, a suicide bomber with explosive vest detonated his explosive in a restaurant outside the Turkish military base in the capital, Mogadishu. And now at least 4 people have been confirmed dead and more than 10 have been wounded in this particular attack. As usual, armed group Al-Shabaab has immediately claimed this responsibility, saying in court they targeted militants trained by the Turkish government here in Mogadishu, meaning the Somali military trained by the Turkish government. Remember, this is the second attack this week whereby a suicide bomber from Al-Shabaab targeted government installations and government officials. On Sunday, Al-Shabaab suicide bomber targeted the spokesman of the government of Somalia, Mahia Mutua, and he was wounded and he was airlifted to Turkey for further medical treatment on Monday. So these attacks are continuing as this electioneering period comes to an end here in Somalia.
And Mohammed, how worried then are security officials in the country given these attacks seem to be coming in the run-up to what promises to be crucial elections?
Well, authorities, especially the cabinet meeting last week on Thursday, Prime Minister called for security agencies to beef up the security. The security agencies here in Somalia, especially during this electioneering period, where Al-Shabaab has promised to step up attacks against all election areas and election activities, security agencies of Somalia and also their partners, the international partners, including the African Union peacekeepers, are desperately trying to control these attacks, because these are new tactics whereby the security agencies tried to control explosive cars coming into the city from all different directions by erecting security barriers and checkpoints. But right now, these are new tactics whereby suicide bombers are coming in, and it is becoming very difficult for the security agencies to control. And Al-Shabaab, as I've said before, have promised and pledged that they will try to carry out their hit and run attacks during this electioneering period, and this is what they meant.
All right, Mohammed, thank you for bringing us the latest in the wake of that tragic bombing in the capital, Mogadishu. CGTN's Mohamed Kahir there in the Somali capital. Returning to West Africa, where Senegal's customs agency has seized ammunition worth $5.2 million. In a statement, the customs agency said 3 containers were found on a Guyana-flagged ship in the port of Dakar. The ship was searched when it stopped to refuel. The identities and nationalities of the crew members have yet to be officially announced. Further afield in Tonga, the government says Saturday's volcano eruption and tsunami caused an unprecedented disaster in the country. Only 3 people have been confirmed dead so far, including 2 locals and a British national. But the government says all houses on Mango Island have been destroyed, and other islands suffered extensive damage. Evacuations are still underway there. The tsunami reached Pacific coastlines from Japan to the United States. Phone lines are still down, and an undersea internet cable between Tonga and Fiji was also cut. Only fragments of information have filtered out via a handful of satellite phones. Meanwhile, in Europe, talks continue to take place to de-escalate tensions between Russia and several Western powers. The main focus of the discussions remains the alleged buildup of Russian troops at Ukraine's border. On Tuesday, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said they were prepared to talk to Russia about security questions in Europe. Moscow has been urged by the United States and its allies to recall its troops back to their barracks.
We expect of Russia that it de-escalate the situation. That could, for example, include a reduction of the troops on the Ukrainian border. And we are, of course, prepared to enter a serious dialogue with Russia about security questions in Europe.
The main task now is to make progress on the political way forward. NATO allies are ready to meet with Russia again, and today I have invited Russia and all the NATO allies to attend a series of meetings in the NATO-Russia Council in the near future to address our concerns, but also listen to Russia's concerns and to try to find a way forward to prevent any military attack against Ukraine.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov responded on Tuesday to calls to reduce his country's troop presence at the shared border with Ukraine. Lavrov said that Russia isn't threatening any country. He also criticized the US and NATO for showing what he described as an obvious double standard.
We explained that we cannot accept any demands regarding the actions of our armed forces on our own land. Moreover, we have noticed that while making these demands of moving the troops back to their barracks, as the American representatives worded it, at the same time, NATO members proclaimed that whatever is going on NATO's territories, movement of troops, including troops who came to Europe from across the ocean, that doesn't concern anybody but the NATO countries. Well, the double standard is obvious.
Well, Lavrov also touched on the likelihood of Russian President Vladimir Putin meeting with his Ukrainian counterpart, President Volodymyr Zelensky.
For us, it's not about when to meet, but what for. If the sole purpose of the meeting is Mr. Zelensky being able to say that once again, under his initiative, a group of esteemed leaders got together and he considers his mission to be completed, we don't need that.
You're watching Africa Live on CGTN. It's time for a quick break. Still ahead on the program. Africa's low numbers of those fully vaccinated against COVID-19 highlighted at World Economic Forum session. And we'll tell you why Kenya's capital city runs a high risk of facing environmental and food supply challenges.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
Is the front line now after 9 days of fighting?
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front line.
Within clear view of this front line position.
Welcome back. We're turning to the 2022 World Economic Forum, where vaccine inequality was the latest topic on the agenda. The WHO's Emergencies Director highlighted that only 7% of Africa's population has been fully vaccinated. Mike Ryan said over half of the world's population has received a full dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. John Nkengasong, Director of the Africa Centers for Disease Control, says this was unacceptable. He called the imbalance of a collapse of global cooperation and solidarity.
Now, over half the world's, if we look at the population of the world, in total, over half of the world's population has received 2 doses of vaccine. But if we look at in Africa, in our African regional office states, only 7%. So the reality is that the world is moving towards a 70% goal. The problem is we are leaving huge swathes of the world behind.
So what we have seen over the last 2 years is really total collapse of global cooperation and solidarity.
period. I think there's absolutely no reason why a continent of Africa should be lagging behind with having 7% of the population fully immunized. A continent of 1.2 billion people is totally unacceptable.
Now, in an online gathering of the World Economic Forum's Davos agenda, Chinese President Xi Jinping stressed the need for multilateralism. This is a view echoed by many experts on the continent. Let's now go to South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria to get some reactions to President Xi's speech.
It was very comprehensive, and it reflects also sincerely and seriously what the world is at the moment going through, what is going in the world now. He actually captures all the challenges and the problems and the opportunities. In other words, he says we can solve all the problems if we know how to collaborate, if we know how to work together. And he says even this challenge we face now has brought us together, but we need to continue to work together to solve not only this problem, but any new future problems. So I think it's a fascinating, to be honest with you, it's a very fascinating speech that he gave. Very, very.
The $40 billion commitment made at FOCAC a month ago, that's excellent initiative. I would urge the US and Europe to follow up on that. I think the 40 billion of investments and financing over the next 3 years, because what Africa needs actually more than aid right now is FDI and financial support to accelerate the growth, the transformation of Africa. Okay, those kinds of initiatives, I think, will help.
I've always seen China as one of the emerging economies that's actually pushing to bridge the global divide. If you look at the level of infrastructure investment China has made in third world countries, including Africa, and President Xi also made mention that they had actually given out about 2 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines. Those are practical ways of bridging the economic divide, the divide between the developed and African countries or other emerging economies.
Well, Beijing says the Chinese president's speech has raised the world's confidence to both fight the coronavirus pandemic and fix the economy.
This year's speech is the Chinese leader's systematic elaboration on globalization, the community with a shared future for mankind, multilateralism, China's high-quality development, and its determination to continue reform and opening up. It clearly showed what China advocates, what China opposes, and what China will do. It showed that China is committed to work with all parties to address global challenges and push for a community with a shared future for mankind.
Let's take you to Uganda now, where a fuel shortage has sent prices skyrocketing, with hundreds of trucks stuck in huge tailbacks at the country's border with Kenya. The nation's energy minister, Ruth Nankabirwa, says the border delays have been caused by a faulty scanner used by custom officials to check vehicles and issues regarding COVID-19. Wilkista Nyabwa with more details.
At Uganda's eastern border with Kenya, officials are carrying out mandatory coronavirus testing. This has caused massive queues of traffic, including trucks. The resultant impact of the clearance delays is an acute fuel shortage in the country.
So many cars are parking, the motorcycles use petrol, and most of them, the price actually, in terms of even transport, has really shot. So it's going to be a very big challenge to everyone at the end of the day. A lot of friends call me and they tell me about them trying to go to other fuel stations and they cannot get fuel. And a lot of cars have actually been parked. Right now it is a very big situation, not just a job.
It's very hard for us to get because you only get in a few petrol stations. Only a few, like the other one is not there. I hear even this one, some are done like that. Down there is not there because of the delay, the delaying of the truck drivers.
Uganda's western district of Hoima recently discovered large oil deposits, but despite this, the area is also experiencing the same fate as the rest of the country.
Yesterday,
I was in one of the suburbs around Kampala, and I took a liter of petrol at 12,000. Yes, 12,000, and I was really like, hey, what is going on in the country? It's too high. I've never seen the prices of fuel going high to that extent.
Reports indicate that pumps have also run dry at petrol stations in the north and west of Uganda. This has led to a hike in taxi and bus fares in many parts of the country. Wilkesanyabo, CGTN.
Well, crossing the border now, environmentalists are warning that Kenya's capital city, Nairobi, could face environmental and food supply challenges in the near future due to increased real estate development in neighboring regions that previously held vast tracts of farmland. The Kiambu region that borders Nairobi is one of them and has been seeing more of its farms turned into homes by developers cashing in on increased demand for housing. Enoxikolia reports.
Situated about 14 kilometers away from the Kenyan capital Nairobi is the town of Kiambu and its environs. Kiambu County, as the devolved administrative unit is known locally, was once one of the country's leading agricultural zones, but that is slowly changing. Nairobi city has been growing and expanding into neighboring counties like Kiambu County, where we are now. Traditionally, Kiambu has been a food-producing zone, but the expansion of Kenya's capital city has seen farmlands here converted into real estate. This road is Nairobi's northern bypass, a major link road meant to ease traffic congestion into and out of the Kenyan capital. It's also the geographical border between Nairobi and Kiambu. During the road's construction between 2009 and 2014, it meandered through coffee farms, but several years down the line, only pockets of these farms can be seen as residential areas emerge, and construction work continues.
People have gone into those traditionally food baskets to get somewhere to put up their shelter. This is where land is cheaper, and it's cheaper because there is plenty of it, because these coffee estates are in 100 hectares and above.
Francis Ngige has been a laborer on this farm in Kiambu County since the year 2000. He has seen much of the central Kenyan region's farmlands disappear. Right in front of him, the new owner of his former farm is putting up commercial structures. The latest one is a fuel station.
The people I knew left. I don't know these new ones.
Nancy Githaiga, an environmentalist and the African Wildlife Foundation's country director, says Kenya is losing an important food production zone to urban development, and the impact of this could be felt soon.
These people require settlements, but do we necessarily need to live in these high agricultural areas? Could we have better planning? So there are many areas we could use for settlements if only there was proper planning. Then what is usable for agriculture needs to be left for agriculture. What is for water recharge, groundwater recharge, very, very important, also is required to be left open.
It is this environmental function of the green Kiambu areas to the capital city that worries her. She says if these areas disappear completely, the impact could be catastrophic.
Some countries would drill boreholes not to get water out of the ground but to recharge. So is that the direction we want to take for Nairobi? Or do we want to safeguard what is naturally recharge areas?
Production of some of these farmlands have gone down. Basically to increased cost of imports and many other factors. So these people want to have an investment that is better.
Nancy says that due to population increase in Nairobi, the expansion of the capital city should be done in areas that are less suitable for farming, while ensuring agriculture continues to thrive in the neighboring productive regions. Enoxikolia, CGTN, Kiambu, Kenya.
Well, let's take you through our top stories this hour. In Sudan, the chairman of Sudan's Transitional Sovereign Council, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, has ordered the establishment of a committee to probe Monday's clashes between street protesters and security forces, which resulted in the deaths of 7 people. Protests against military rule have been ongoing in parts of the country. Vaccine inequity was the latest topic on the agenda at the 2022 World Economic Forum being held online. The WHO's Emergencies Director highlighted that only 7% of Africa's population has been fully vaccinated. John Nkengasong, director of the Africa Centers for Disease Control, called the imbalance a collapse of global cooperation and solidarity. And finally, talks continue to take place to de-escalate tensions between Russia and several Western powers. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said they were prepared to talk to Russia about security questions in Europe. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Russia isn't threatening any country. He also criticized the US and NATO for showing what he described as an obvious double standard. And those are your top stories this hour. Well, Hannah's back in studio to bring us the latest in business. Hannah?
Thanks for that, Mahia. Here's what's coming up in Africa Live Business. South Africa's mining output beats market forecasts after 5.2% growth in November. And Egypt forecasts Suez Canal revenues will rise to $7 billion by the end of 2022.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's now take a look at the day's business news. We begin in Southern Africa, where South Africa's mining output rose 5.2% year-on-year in November 2021, buoyed by a 38.1% rise in the production of platinum group metals. The PGM, as they are commonly called, contributed about 7.7 percentage points to the overall tally, and that's according to Stats South Africa. However, as financial services provider Nedbank reports, the overall production tally was dragged down for the 5th consecutive month by coal, which declined by 7.9%. Building materials also declined for the first time since November 2020 by 11.6%, and that's compared with October. South Africa's seasonal adjusted mining production decreased by 2.2% in November after month-on-month changes of 3.1% in October and 4.4% in September. Well, over in Egypt, revenue from the country's Suez Canal is expected to rise to $7 billion by the end of 2022. Suez Canal revenues hit a record $6.3 billion in 2021, and that's despite the Evergreen blockage. This was the Ever Given blockage. This is an increase of nearly 13% compared with the $5.6 billion recorded in 2020. The vital waterway through which at least 10% of global trade passes also posted record cargo volumes in 2021. Almost 1.6 billion tons of cargo was shipped through the canal last year, compared with 1.2 billion tons in 2020, an 8.5% increase. The Egyptian Suez Canal Authority will increase transit fees by 6% starting this February, but cruise ships and vessels carrying liquefied natural gas will be exempt. Well, over in East Africa, data released by Kenya's Treasury shows that the country's revenue authority surpassed its revenue performance in the first half of the financial year 2021-2022. In the July-December 2021 period, the tax authority recorded $9.76 billion of tax collection against a target of $9.3 billion. It also surpassed both the overall and exchequer targets in December 2021 by nearly $90 million and $72.8 million, respectively. Customs revenue, in the meantime, reflected a revenue surplus of about $33 million. That's after collecting $355 million against a target of $322 million. Domestic taxes performance also improved with a 30.8% growth compared to a similar period last year. Let's head over back to North Africa, where the International Monetary Fund's outgoing country chief for Tunisia says that the country's crisis-stricken economy needs deep reforms. Jerome Vacher's remarks come as Tunisia seeks a new IMF bailout. Authorities say they are optimistic about reaching a deal by the end of this quarter. However, according to Vacher, discussions are still at an early stage. The IMF says that it first wants to understand what the government is planning in terms of economic reform. A deal with the global lender could entail politically painful reforms for Tunisia, such as cutting subsidies on basic goods or tackling the wage bill of a public sector that employs some 680,000 of the country's 12 million inhabitants.
The
economic situation in Tunisia is difficult. Like many countries, it was aggravated by the COVID-19 crisis, and Tunisia has seen its worst recession since independence. The country had pre-existing problems, in particular budget deficits and public debt, which have worsened in recent years. External deficits have also been persistent in previous years, and above all, growth has been weak and largely insufficient. In our opinion, it's an economy that needs very deep structural reforms, especially to improve the business environment. But it also requires a correction of macroeconomic imbalance, an imbalance of the budgetary situation, and a deep reform of public enterprises.
Well, in the world of showbiz, over in West Africa, Nigeria's movie industry doubled ticket sales in 2021 as it emerged stronger from the impact of COVID. And as CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam now reports, analysts expect the rapidly growing middle class in Nigeria to help its film industry to post an even better performance this year.
The Silverbird Cinema in Abuja, Nigeria's capital, is a hub for entertainment. And it's a favorite spot for movie enthusiast Anita Eloha, who doesn't miss a week. She's now catching up on lost times at the peak of COVID-19 when cinemas were shut down.
It has been exhilarating. At least I come here and have fun most of the times with my friends and also other people. So I'm very, very happy that the cinema has been opened again.
Nigeria's cinema industry suffered a major shortfall in 2020, an impact of the COVID-19 lockdown. But it made a strong comeback in 2021 as weekend movie ticket sales hit $5.79 million from $2.89 million in 2020. Operators say good content, technology upgrade, and adherence to safety protocols helped in boosting customers' confidence.
It was mostly due to having producers produce more films. We have put in safety measures, all over the world. In the cinema sector, you will not find any case of, no COVID cases traced to the cinema. Do you understand? So that has helped us as a business.
Many see people returning to the cinemas as a good sign for economic recovery, one that should be sustained.
We're confident as long as we have good content, it can only get better. And we, as much as possible, will have to run with the time.
We need to ensure that anything that may affect the cinema industry adversely should be avoided in order for us to continue growing that sector, in order for us to sustain the jobs. I advocate that people should just move about their businesses, but then have to protect themselves in order for us to not to kill and distort the flow of the economy.
Nigeria's film sector contributes 2.3% to the country's GDP, with the nation driven by growing middle class, increased investments in movie production, and millennials who've come to embrace the cinema culture. Industry players are optimistic that the sector is on the right path to recovery and could experience a boom in 2022. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, let's leave the continent's borders for a while and head over to China, where the GDP grew by 8.1% last year, the largest jump since 2011. That's according to data from the National Bureau of Statistics. The expansion is slightly above the IMF and the World Bank's expectations of 8% growth and beyond the 6% target set by the government. Facing challenges brought by COVID-19, China has seen its economic activities cool down after a strong rebound in the first half of 2021. From October to December, the country's economy grew by 4% from a year earlier, a further deceleration from the 18.3% jump in the first quarter, according to state-run statistics agency. Earlier, we spoke with Fathel Kaboub, who is an associate professor of economics at Denison University, to analyze the data.
Well, as you know, China is an export-oriented country. It's the second largest economy in the world. And as such, it's very dependent on the health of the global economy, especially the largest economies that consume made in China products. And just as equally, China is dependent on the smaller nations that export raw materials and inputs for the Chinese industries. So with the COVID disruptions that we've seen over the last couple of years, unfortunately, those disruptions will continue. The good news for the Chinese economy is that the Chinese government succeeded in substituting the demand from the global economy with, substituting the demand that it lost internally and in some emerging markets with the demand from the global economy. As the US reopened and many of the largest economies in the world reopened, they started to import even more goods from China. So that kept the demand going.
Well, I'll be back at the top of the hour for more business news. And here's what's coming up on Global Business tonight. Crude oil prices have hit the highest level since 2014 over supply concerns. Brent crude has risen to almost $88 a barrel from lows of $68 at the beginning of December. So what are the implications for this increase for world economics? We'll be exploring that and much more at the top of the hour. But now let's take a look at what's coming up next on Africa Live with Mahia.
Hannah, thank you. We will see you again at the top of the hour. Meanwhile, there's plenty more still to come here on Africa Live. Here's what's coming up. Egypt seeks to promote the breeding of Arabian horses known for their beauty and speed.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back and thank you for staying with us on Africa Live. Now, Arabian horses are coveted for their special characteristics that make them unique in terms of their beauty and speed. In an effort to boost the breeding industry and promote the Egyptian brand of Arabian horses, Egypt held its first Arabian Horses Beauty Forum. Here is Adel Mahroui with the details.
Egypt is famous for its Arabian horses.
For decades, breeders here have been working to preserve the country's 5 main Arabian horses bloodline. El Sharqiya Governorate, east of Cairo, has the biggest number of horse farms. It's here that most of the horse-related events get organized annually. This week saw the start of yet another event.
This is the first Egyptian Arabian Horses Forum that focuses on the beauty aspects of Arabian horses. The shows were designed to highlight the features of the pure Arabian horses. We've seen great engagement. We have participants from Iraq, Saudi Arabia and the UAE.
Arabian horses are known for their unique face, bulging eyes, high tail carriage, among other qualities. Organizers held a beauty pageant featuring some 50 horses to highlight to the participants the significance of those features.
There's growing interest in Egyptian horses, which has encouraged the government to open up the market. It's making a huge breeding complex in the new administrative capital. Arabian horses are considered to be exceptional worldwide. Our Egyptian bloodlines are even more unique.
Egyptian Arabian horses can have great potential to bring foreign currencies if we focus on exporting. The government is expanding its breeding capabilities. We have established a lab to inspect horses' genetics and origins. We neglected that business for some time, but now we are working hard to prove that Egypt is free from certain diseases, including the African horse plague.
The forum was an opportunity for professional breeders to share their experiences and for amateurs to learn more about the business. In 2010, Egyptian horse global exports were banned due to poor supervision of local breeding. Since that time, the country has been working hard to have the ban lifted so as to open up international markets for its horses. And those efforts have started paying off as exports slowly resume.
There has been a crisis in the Egyptian market because of the ban. But thanks to the state's efforts, exportation has been slowly and gradually reopening. We are now exporting to a few European countries, and soon more markets will open for us.
This latest Arabian Horses show marks a turning point for the horse breeding industry in Egypt. Recognizing the potential it has to export this unique type of horses, the government is restructuring the industry by establishing breeding associations for each governorship. Adel Mahroui, CGTN.
Right, well, coming up in the sport, we'll bring you the latest from the ongoing Africa Cup of Nations in Cameroon.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Right, well, let's start things off at the Africa Cup of Nations, where Cameroon football supporters